In this video, we're going to look at using a Prime95B inside MetaMorph. First of all, we'll have a look at some of the features of the camera. Just to quickly load the camera into MetaMorph, one setting you always have to change as MetaMorph activates it by default is to deactivate this noise filter. We'll come back to that later. So now we'll go to our live view, and here we have our image. So the Prime95B is a back illuminated CMOS sensor with a 1200 by 1200 resolution and 95% quantum efficiency. It's also got really low read noise, meaning that this is a perfect camera for applications that demand sensitivity in addition to good field of view and high speed. So we have an 18.7mm sensor, meaning that we have a really nice field of view, and 11 micron pixels, which are perfectly matched to use a 100 times objective for maximum resolution. We've got an 80,000 electron full well, meaning that we can capture 80,000 different levels of dynamic range. This is huge compared to an EMCCD. And finally, this camera can run at 82 frames per second full frame, or 41 in our higher dynamic range mode. So now we'll have a look at some basic controls, starting with changing the exposure time. So here we specify our exposure time. Say we've got a fixed sample and it can afford to illuminate for a long time, you'll get a clear image with a fairly long exposure, say 200 milliseconds like our sample slide here. Whereas if you're trying to image dynamics, you'll want to use a much shorter exposure time, say 2 milliseconds. And here our dynamics should be captured. One thing to make sure of is that in the Display tab you have chosen Auto Scale to adjust your histogram. Next we'll have a look at binning. If you have need of a larger pixel and slightly better signal to noise, you can increase the binning like so to 2x2. Just quickly resize the window again with the scroll wheel. And now we have an image with improved signal to noise at a cost of resolution. Next we'll have a look at readout rates and gain. Here on the Special tab, we can choose between two digitizer settings. That's two readout rates. We have a fast mode at 200 MHz, which generates 12-bit images, so 16,000 different grey levels in your image. Or we have a high dynamic range mode, which is 100 MHz, so half the speed, but reads out a 16-bit image, so 65,000 different grey levels. So if your sample is very bright or doesn't move very much, you'll want the high dynamic range mode. Or if you're measuring a fast process, or your sample doesn't produce very much light, can choose the faster mode. Just to quickly illustrate this, if you're in the fast mode and choose a very long exposure time, say a second, here we have an image that's overexposed. Whereas if we now choose the 16-bit high dynamic range mode, we're no longer overexposed. In the 12-bit mode, which you should use when you've got fairly low signal, we have 3 different gain states in order to maximize what you can get from your signal. Gain represents the number of electrons captured per grey level in your resulting image, and gain setting 1 represents the maximum dynamic range, whereas gain setting 3 represents the highest sensitivity, so it will stretch out your histogram, and you'll make the most of your low signals with gain setting 3. Now we'll have a quick look at taking movies and time-lapse. There's one quick setting that you may want to change whether you're taking a movie or a time-lapse, and that's in the Special tab. You'll want to have a clear mode of pre-sequence, which is the default if you're taking a movie or just doing normal acquisition, or pre-exposure if you're taking a time-lapse where you'll wait between frames. So then, to take a movie, we go to Acquire, Stream Acquisition. Here we can specify the number of frames that we want to record, and whether we want to stream to the RAM, which is faster, or stream to the hard disk, which allows us to capture for longer without running out of RAM. At the bottom here of the Camera Parameters tab, you can choose to display a live preview during the acquisition, but depending on the speed of your computer, this may harm performance. So quickly to record this 400 frame video, if we go to our capture and scroll to the end, here we have 400 frames in just under 5 seconds, meaning that we're capturing at our expected frame rate for the 12-bit mode. Finally, we'll have a look at one of the advanced features of the Prime95B, and that's PrimeEnhance, our onboard denoising algorithm. If you're working at fairly low signal levels, or just generally have a fairly poor signal to noise, and it will filter out some of the noise, preserving the intensity values of your signal. so you'll still get your peaks at the same values, but you'll just have less of the background noise. You can activate PrimeEnhance by ticking the noise filter option in the Special tab. Here we see a 1024 by 1024 region in the center of the field of view has activated PrimeEnhance. Comparing it to the edge and comparing it to before we turned it on, you can see a nice increase in both the contrast and the signal to noise. We have a nicer background with less of the random variation that we saw before. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact Photometrics.